Welcome to video number 31 in the Using iTrain tutorial series. My name is Bob. In this tutorial we look at the station selection parameter, specifically the in order option. Welcome back. The next field we will look at is selection. The selection parameter determines how iTrain selects a block within a station during automatic routing. Selection is only active when a weight has been specified within the station for the train or the train type. Otherwise, selection is ignored. I'll try to explain what that means in a little more detail, but because there is interaction with other parameters within the station, it will be necessary to touch on some subjects that we haven't really covered yet. So bear with me and we'll begin with the basics. When we start an automatic route, iTrain works out the path that the train will take from its current position to a station. When it finds a station, it then needs to decide which of the blocks in the station it will take. The way that it decides which block to take is specified by the selection parameter. If we click on selection, we'll see that there are 6 different options to choose from. We'll look at each one in turn, but we'll start up the top with probably the most commonly used, which is in order. In order means the first block in the station blocks list will be chosen first unless it is already occupied. Then the next block in the list will be tried, and so on. It does not mean that on the first loop of a circuit it will choose the first block in the list. Then on the second loop of the circuit, it then chooses the second block in the list. That is not what it means. If on the second loop the first block is still available, the first block will be chosen again. Now I'm going to jump to an example to demonstrate it. Here we have 3 blocks in station 1. Block 1, block 2, block 3. And at the bottom here we have another station, S2, from which our trains will start. It doesn't need to be a station that the trains will start from. It could be just a block. Let's take a look at how S1, station S1 is defined. So we'll go up to the edit menu and down to the stations editor, and we click on S1. The type is a shadow station, but as we saw in the previous tutorial, that will have no meaning in terms of how it directly influences the station operation. It is now only giving an indication of the purpose of the station, so we don't need to take any notice of the station type. Selection is set to in order, and we know that that means the first block in the blocks tab will be chosen first if it is available. And we can see that the block order is B1, B2, B3. We will not talk in detail about these other columns yet. That is for another tutorial. But what we can say is that these are the default settings that you would normally see. And note that weight is ticked for each of the blocks. That will become important later. If we click on the Train Types tab, we'll see that all train types is showing. And this again is the default setting that you would normally see. When all train types is showing here on its own, it means that the parameters that we specify elsewhere in the station will be applied to all train types. Note also that weight is ticked here, and the chance of a wait is set at 100%, so it will always wait, and the wait time has been set to 30 seconds. Again, these are all default settings. We will be doing more on train types and the Train Types tab in a future tutorial. And in the Options tab, there's nothing set here, so we don't need to worry about this tab. Okay, so to summarize, the station is set to receive all train types, and all trains will stop at the station and wait for 30 seconds. The block that the train will stop at is determined by the selection parameter here. And the selection parameter will be active for all train types that enter the station because a wait has been specified for all train types and for all blocks. Remember, at the beginning of this tutorial we stated that selection will only be active if a wait has been specified. So this is what we mean by a wait being specified. The waits being ticked. Okay, so let's put a train on the layout and see what happens when we run automatic routing without a route. So we'll drag DB car onto this block, and note that there is no route selection here because no train route has been assigned to any of these trains in this example. Remember, when a train route has been assigned, you'll see another drop down menu here similar to the type drop down but for a route. We haven't got any routes assigned here, so we don't have to make that assigned to no route. It already is not assigned to a route. So when we click on the Start button, we will automatically be going into automatic routing without a route. So we press the Start button and we see that block 1 has been selected and the path has been reserved to block 1. And block 1 was selected because that is the first block in the list. And if we progress it around the circuit, it enters the station into block 1, and now it is starting the 30-second wait, which we can cancel by left clicking on it and selecting cancel wait, and then we let it continue around the circuit. It's gone into the other block in the station this time, but you see it has reserved the path to block 1 again because block 1 is still available. Now from now on, to speed up showing the selection of the blocks, I will simply stop and start the trains each time from this station here, and we can see which block is being selected without having to run around the circuit each time. So if I stop and start, you'll see that every time it is choosing block 1, which is how in order works. Now let's see what happens if we place a train in block 1 so that it is occupied. What do you think will happen? We start DB car and block 2 is selected because block 1 is not available and block 2 is the next block in the list. And if we also put a train in block 2 and press start, we'll see that it chooses block 3. There is no other block available in this example, but you get the meaning, I think. Okay, so let's reset that, and we'll remove these trains with shift click, and we'll change the order of the blocks in the station. So what we'll do is we'll make B2 the first in the list here. So we click on it and we then press the move up button. And now the order is B2, B1, B3. We click the apply button, close the window down, press the start button, and we see that each time B2 is being selected because that is now the first block in the list. And if B2 is occupied, where is it going to go to? That's right, it goes to B1 because B1 is now second in the list. Now let's do something different. Let's go into the stations again and we will remove the wait from block 1. So now no wait will occur in this block, block 1 here. We press apply, close it down, and now when we press the start button, we see that block 3 is chosen. It will have tried to use block 2 because block 2 is the first in the list. It was occupied and not available. It then will have tried block 1, but block 1 has no wait allowed there, so it chooses the next block in the list, which is block 3. Now look what happens if we remove the wait from block 3 as well. What do you think will happen this time? So block 2 is the first choice, then block 1, but that has no wait allowed now, and nor is a wait allowed in block 3. So what will iTrain do? Well, it reserves the route around as far as it can go, and it is now waiting until block 2 is free and available. And if I move block 2 out of here manually, we then see that iTrain reserves the route in the block 2. It is the only block that it is allowed to use. So let's reset everything and take it back to where we were previously. So we'll click the 2 waits on there, and now we're back to where we were. Now, the way that this layout is set up at the moment is that all of the blocks are bidirectional blocks. So if we had moved the train into the station from this direction, the same thing would have happened in terms of the order selection of the blocks. I need to remove this DBIC as well, don't I? There we go. So let's see what happens when we change the direction of the blocks. So we'll go into the blocks editor and we'll click on B2, and B2 is set to bidirectional, and we're going to change it to unidirectional and click the apply button. So now you see that there is just one arrow pointing in the clockwise direction. And remember, the block order is set to B2, B1, B3. Our train is pointing forwards in forward gear and in the clockwise direction. Oh, and by the way, I'm using just single locos as the trains here, so there are no wagons or coaches to be taken into account. The same thing applies if you had wagons, it just makes it easier to maneuver things. So if I click the start button, what will happen is block 2 gets reserved. It's no different to what happened before. If I keep repeating, it is choosing block 2. Now let's change the direction of the train and then see what happens this time. Block 1 is reserved and not block 2. So we've learnt from that the selection parameter is block direction sensitive. In this case here, iTrain would have tried to choose block 2, but it was not available because the train cannot go into the block against the direction of this unidirectional track. So it's effectively not available. So iTrain chooses the next one in the list, which is block 1. Let's see what happens if we make block 2 preferred direction. So we come into here, we're in block 2, we change it to preferred direction, click apply, close it down. We're traveling in this direction, press the start, and it chooses block 2. It does that because it just means that that direction is preferred, but it doesn't prevent it from entering the block in the other direction if that is what is indicated. And if we keep trying that, we see that it keeps trying block 2. Another way we can affect block selection is via the Permissions tabs. Remember, in the Locomotive Properties, for example, there is a Permissions tab, and we can get to that either through the Edit menu and Locomotives, or we can double click on the black dot next to the train here, and that expands so that it reveals the content of the train. And then if we right click on the locomotive name itself, DB360, and click Properties, we get to the Locomotive Properties that way. And in here we have the Permissions tab. And here we can define blocks that the locomotive will have access to by clicking that button, or we can append blocks where we don't want the loco to have access to. So let's append a block for the no access and select B2 as a no access block. Press OK, and now see what happens when we press the start button. So remember last time it selected block 2 even in the preferred direction. This time it cannot select block 2 because it has no access to it, so it chooses the next one in the list, which is B1. So that permissions tab, the locomotive permissions tab, prevented the locomotive going into this block because that locomotive is part of that train, DB car. If we decoupled that locomotive, DB360, and attached it to another train, that train would then not get access to that block because that train has DB360 attached to it. But we can also do a similar thing with the train permissions tab. So this time, instead of clicking on the locomotive, if we right click on the train here and select properties, we get the train properties for DB car, and we've got the permissions tab, and we can do the same here. So let's append and let's make B1 no access for this particular train. Click OK, and now let's see what happens when we press go or the start button. This time it has to choose block 3. Block 2 it cannot get access to because the locomotive is denied access to this block. It can't go into block 1 because the train doesn't have access to block 1. The only block left is B3. And we can go another step further too. We can use the permissions tab in the train type. So now for a whole class of trains, we can click on the permissions tab, go to access, append, and we'll put in block 3 this time. Click apply, and now this is applying to all cargo trains. So all cargo train classes will not have access to B3 in this station. Click apply. Now when we press the go button, what do you think will happen? It says route not possible from this position, because we have now blocked off every one of the blocks in this station. Block 2 because of the locomotive permission, block 1 because of the train permission, and block 3 because this train is a cargo train. But if we put another train on, see what happens now. Let's put D6510 onto this block and put it into that throttle and then press play, and you can see it's gone to block 2 because this particular train has access to all of these blocks, and so it is now reverted to the block order, which is block 2 first, then 1, then 3. And if we place trains in these other blocks so they're occupied, so if I put a train here and a train there and then click the go button, we can see that it goes into block 3 because it has access to block 3. It has access to block 3 because it is a local passenger type train, not a cargo train. Cargo is blocked from this particular block, isn't it? But if we go to the train and then click on D6510, we could make it a cargo type train, press apply, and now when we do the route, it is not allowed to go into B3, but it does have permission to go into these two blocks, but they're occupied. But as soon as we move the train out of that block, we can see that that train can move into here. So we've seen that block selection was affected by the type of selection that we choose from. We've only looked at in order at the moment. We've seen that the block selection can be affected by whether the weight is assigned to those particular blocks. We saw that block selection was affected by the direction criteria that we've set for the block. So we know that it is direction sensitive. And we've seen that the block selection can be affected by the permissions tab for the locomotive, the train, and the train type. So block selection is also affected by the permissions in the block. Another way that permission may be denied is if you've got an electric train and the block needs to be electrified. If the block is not electrified, obviously an electric train would not be able to get access to it. Now, to finish off, let's just see what happens when no weights have been assigned to a station. So let me just clear this all up. And we'll get rid of these messages by double clicking on them. And I'll remove these two trains as well. And we'll put this new train on that has permissions to enter all of the blocks. So if I bring this into this throttle and press the start button, you'll see that it defaults to block 2, which is the first block in the block list. Okay, but if we go to the station and then in the train types tab we click the weight to remove the weight and press apply, now for all train types no trains will wait in this station. And what happens when we press the play this time, or the start, sorry, we see if we keep stopping and starting, we will see that iTrain is randomly picking the blocks. So the selection criteria is now ignored. We can tell that the selection has been ignored because when it reserves the path, you see the block symbol has not turned orange to indicate that there's a wait going to occur. It is white, which means no wait has happened and therefore the selection has been ignored. If I keep repeating, you see every time the block box is white and not orange. iTrain is just selecting a random path just like it would if it was travelling from point A to point B and had different options in terms of the path it could take. It's effectively doing that in this station now. And if we reapply the weight, by the way, we can get to the station properties by right-clicking on the station and then selecting properties, like you can with trains and locomotives, and reapply the weight here. And then when we press go again, it reverts back to block 2, and you can see that this has turned orange, and we know that a weight has been specified. And it's worth noting what happens when we reduce the percentage chance of a weight occurring to less than 100%. So at the moment it's at 100%, so there will always be a weight. If we reduce that, let's reduce it to half, to 50. Now see what happens when we press the start and stop button. So we press start. So on this occasion it is not chosen a weight, so we know that the selection criteria has been ignored and therefore a weight is not occurring. If we stop, start again, this time a weight has occurred, so and the selection criteria has been applied. Let's try it again. No weight is occurring, so we know the selection criteria has been ignored and it's randomly choosing a block. And do one more. Here it's gone back to applying the selection criteria. Block 2 is chosen, a weight has occurred. So when the weight chance is anything less than 100%, there will be occasions when iTrain will choose not to weight, and therefore the selection criteria will be ignored, and you will see that iTrain randomly chooses a path through the station. What we have seen in terms of the different factors that affect the block selection applies to all of these different options of selection criteria. So we won't repeat the exercise of going through all of those different effects when we run through these other options, which we will do in the next tutorial. Hope to see you then. Thanks for watching.